Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to explain an emotional mafia drama filled with heartbreak, revenge, family, healing, and an unexpected contract marriage. The story follows Nora, a woman who has just escaped a cruel marriage and believes that love is no longer something she needs. But only 3 days after her divorce, her life takes a completely unexpected turn when she meets Luca Castellino, a powerful mafia boss and a single father whose young son desperately needs someone he can trust. Luca is not looking for romance. He only wants a mother figure for his traumatized 4-year-old son, Leo. Nora agrees to a marriage that is supposed to be nothing more than a legal arrangement, with separate rooms, separate finances, and no emotional expectations. But neither Nora nor Luca realizes that the little boy at the center of their agreement will slowly change both of their lives. Leo has been deeply damaged by a kidnapping in his past, and he refuses to trust almost every woman who comes near him. Yet Nora manages to reach his heart in a way that no nanny ever could. As Nora begins healing Leo, she also begins healing herself from years of humiliation and self-hatred. Meanwhile, Luca is pulled back into the dangerous world of mafia business, leaving Nora and Leo together while enemies continue to surround the family. What begins as a cold contract slowly becomes something much more meaningful. So, let's begin the story from the very beginning. The story begins with Nora standing at a painful turning point in her life. Only 3 days earlier, she had signed divorce papers and walked away from a marriage that had slowly destroyed her confidence. For 3 years, she had given everything to her husband and his family. She had cooked for them, cleaned for them, cared for his nephew, and sacrificed her own career because they wanted her to become completely devoted to the household. Instead of being treated like a loved wife, Nora had eventually realized that she was being treated like an unpaid servant. Her husband, Sebastian, constantly criticized her appearance and made her feel ashamed of her body. He told her that people stared at him because of the way she looked. He complained that she could not earn money and accused her of being nothing more than a burden. Even the meals she prepared were used against her, as if cooking for the family somehow made her less valuable. Eventually, Sebastian told her to take her belongings and leave. Nora left that night with almost nothing. All she had was an old travel bag and $36. She had no comfortable home waiting for her, no supportive husband, and no clear idea of what she would do next. For years, she had believed that sacrificing herself for her marriage would eventually bring her happiness, but instead it had left her emotionally exhausted and deeply insecure. She had also developed unhealthy habits around food and struggled with the way she saw herself. But despite everything, somewhere inside her was still a woman who wanted to rebuild her life. That chance appeared in the form of a simple job advertisement. Nora discovered that a wealthy family was looking for someone who could take care of a young boy. At first, she assumed it was just another childcare position, but when she arrived at the estate, she quickly realized that this was no ordinary family. The house was enormous, heavily guarded, and filled with an atmosphere that made it obvious that powerful people lived there. She soon learned that the employer was Luca Castellino, a man whose name was connected to one of New York's oldest and most feared mafia organizations. Luca was not hiring a wife because he wanted companionship. He needed someone who could become a mother figure for his 4-year-old son, Leo. The staff warned Nora not to misunderstand the situation. Luca was not looking for romance, and there was no promise of love. Nora found that strangely comforting. After what Sebastian had done to her, romance was the last thing she wanted. She had no interest in falling in love again. All she wanted was financial stability and the opportunity to start over. When Nora finally met Leo, however, she discovered why so many people had failed to keep the job. The little boy immediately rejected her. He called her ugly and fat and told her to go away. But Nora did not become angry. Instead, she watched him carefully and realized that there was something deeper behind his behavior. Leo was only 4 years old, yet he reacted to every unfamiliar woman as though she were a threat. The reason was revealed when Nora learned that Leo had been kidnapped in the past. That traumatic experience had completely changed him. He was terrified of strangers, especially women who tried to get close to him. 13 nannies had already come and gone because none of them could earn his trust. Nora decided that she would not force him. Instead of trying to make him eat, She began talking to him playfully. She pretended that she was feeding herself rather than him and turned the meal into a game. She called him a little hero and encouraged him to eat vegetables because heroes needed strength. Slowly, Leo began responding. The boy who had refused to eat suddenly started participating in the game. Nora discovered that he loved the idea of becoming stronger, and she used that imagination to make him comfortable. Before long, he finished his food and surprised everyone in the household. For the first time, Leo had willingly eaten with someone other than his father. Luca's staff were shocked. Nora had accomplished in minutes what 13 nannies had failed to do. Luca watched the situation carefully and realized that Nora might be exactly what his son needed. He offered her a room in the estate, but there was one strict rule. She was never allowed to go to the third floor because that was Luca's private area. Nora accepted the arrangement. She had no intention of interfering in Luca's personal life. She simply wanted to do her job, earn enough money to become independent again, and help Leo if she could. But Luca soon made her another offer that would completely change her future. He proposed a legal marriage. It was not a romantic proposal. There would be a prenuptial agreement, separate finances, separate bedrooms, and no obligation of intimacy. Luca explained that Leo needed someone who would not suddenly disappear from his life. A marriage, in his opinion, would create a stronger bond and give Leo the security of believing that Nora would remain his mother figure. Nora initially questioned why marriage was necessary, but when Luca explained how badly Leo had been affected by his kidnapping, she understood. She also negotiated her own security. Luca offered her $100,000 every month as living expenses, and he made it clear that whatever money he gave her would remain hers even if the marriage ended. Nora accepted. Only 3 days after signing her divorce papers, she found herself married again. There was no wedding ceremony, no celebration, and no romantic beginning. Yet when Luca handed her his family's ring, he explained that Leo needed to see it on her finger because it would reassure him that she was not going to disappear. Nora understood that this marriage was really about the little boy. When Leo saw the ring and realized that Nora was now officially part of the family, he asked her if she was his mother. Nora did not force him to call her anything. She simply told him that he could see her as part of the family. Leo then asked her to promise that she would never suddenly leave him. Nora looked at the frightened child and gave him the promise he desperately needed. She promised that she would stay. Neither Nora nor Luca knew it yet, but that simple promise would become the foundation of a relationship that would eventually change the entire family. After Nora promised Leo that she would not suddenly disappear, something inside the little boy seemed to change. For the first time since his kidnapping, Leo had found someone he could trust without constantly worrying that she would leave him. That night, when Leo could not sleep, he quietly came to Nora and asked her to tell him a bedtime story. Nora smiled and agreed. She told him about a little prince who was always hiding because something terrible had frightened him. Leo immediately understood the story and began asking questions about what would happen to the little prince. Nora continued, explaining that one day the little prince would meet someone who would not abandon him. When Leo asked whether that person would stay forever, Nora gently told him that as long as the little prince needed her, she would stay. Those simple words meant more to Leo than Nora realized. He finally relaxed, climbed into bed, and allowed himself to sleep peacefully beside her. The entire night passed without the nightmares that had become normal for him. By morning, Luca and the household staff were shocked to discover that Leo had slept through the entire night. Luca understood that Nora had achieved something extremely important. His son had finally experienced a sense of safety. Because of that, Luca decided to increase Nora's monthly allowance by another $50,000. Nora was surprised and told him that she had only told Leo a bedtime story, but Luca knew that what she had given his son was far more valuable than money. She had given him peace. However, not everyone in the household immediately accepted Nora's new position. Some people still saw her as an outsider who had suddenly become Mrs. Castellino. Nora herself did not feel like a real wife. She knew the marriage existed because of Leo, and Luca had made it clear that he did not expect love or intimacy from her. So she focused entirely on the child. As the days passed, Leo became attached to Nora. He followed her around the house like a little shadow and wanted her nearby whenever he ate, played, or went to sleep. Nora slowly became comfortable in her new environment as well. She began to realize that taking care of Leo did not feel like a job anymore. She genuinely cared about him. At the same time, Luca was preparing to leave the estate because dangerous business matters required his attention. His mafia responsibilities could not simply be ignored. He warned Nora that he might be away for some time, but he tried to reassure Leo that he was not abandoning him. Leo became frightened when he heard that his father was leaving. His previous trauma made separation especially difficult for him. Nora immediately stepped in and helped him understand that Luca was leaving to protect the family, not because he wanted to disappear. She created a simple calendar for Leo. Every day that passed, they would draw a small shield on it. When the calendar was filled with shields, Luca would return. Leo accepted the idea and promised to wait with Nora. Before leaving, Luca asked Nora to take care of Leo and also reminded her to take care of herself. He then asked Leo whether he wanted Nora to remain his mother while he was gone. Leo eagerly wanted that, and Luca told him that if Nora wanted to remain his mother, she always would. With that promise, Luca left. Nora expected him to return within about a month, but the situation outside the estate became much more dangerous than expected. 1 month passed, and Luca still did not return. Then another month began. His world was filled with violence, gunfire, blood, and dangerous enemies, while Nora's world became much quieter. She and Leo were left together inside the estate. Instead of allowing herself to become anxious about Luca, Nora concentrated on rebuilding her own life and helping Leo. She began following a healthier routine. She took her medication regularly, improved her sleeping schedule, and slowly stopped punishing herself through food. Her previous marriage had made her believe that every extra bite made her less worthy, but being around Leo gave her a different perspective. Leo did not care about her size. He cared about whether she would be there when he needed her. Nora started realizing that she had spent years hating herself because of someone else's cruelty. She began learning to treat herself with the same kindness she showed Leo. Their relationship became increasingly close. Leo trusted Nora enough to express his feelings openly, and Nora encouraged him to become stronger without forcing him to forget his trauma. She often called him her little hero, and the nickname became something special between them. One day, Nora needed to go to the hospital for a medical checkup. She told Leo that she would only be gone for about an hour and asked him to stay at the estate and behave himself. Normally, Leo would never willingly leave the safety of the property. The staff explained that since his kidnapping, he had refused to step outside the estate because unfamiliar surroundings could trigger a panic attack. But something unexpected happened. Leo decided that he wanted to go with Nora. The people around them were shocked because this was something he had never done before. Nora did not pressure him. Instead, she told him that if he became frightened, he could simply look at her. Leo answered that he was not scared when he was with her. That small sentence showed just how much his relationship with Nora had changed him. During their time outside, Leo noticed that Nora was not feeling well and asked whether she was sick. Nora finally opened up about some of her past. She explained that when she was a teenager, she had developed unhealthy eating habits and had damaged her body by not taking proper care of herself. Later, whenever she felt emotional pain, she had turned to food in an attempt to make herself feel better. Leo listened without judging her. Then he remembered something his father had told him about candy making pain feel better. The innocent little boy offered Nora his own candy. For Nora, the gesture was deeply emotional. This child, who had once rejected every woman who came near him, was now trying to comfort her. She realized that while she was helping Leo recover from his trauma, Leo was also helping her recover from hers. But Nora's peaceful new life was not completely secure. Her memories of Sebastian still haunted her, especially the cruel words he had used against her. She remembered being called fat and ugly and being told that people would laugh if she appeared in public beside him. Those insults had stayed inside her mind long after the marriage ended. Yet Leo's unconditional affection was slowly weakening their power. The little boy did not care about Nora's appearance. He cared about her kindness, her patience, and the fact that she never abandoned him. When they returned to the estate, their bond became even stronger. Nora had originally entered Luca's household as an employee, then became his wife on paper, but she was gradually becoming something much more important to Leo. She was becoming the mother he had desperately needed. Meanwhile, Luca remained away, dealing with dangerous matters that Nora knew very little about. She could only hope that he was safe. She also began wondering whether the cold and distant mafia boss would ever understand how deeply his son had changed. Luca had created the marriage arrangement because he wanted stability for Leo, but he could not have predicted that Nora would transform the child so completely. The woman who had entered his home with only an old travel bag and $36 was now at the center of his son's world. And while Nora believed she was simply helping a frightened child, she was unknowingly becoming part of a family that was far more dangerous and complicated than she had imagined. As the weeks continued, Nora and Leo became closer than anyone in the Castellino household had expected. What had started as a simple agreement between two adults was slowly turning into a real family relationship. Leo no longer followed Nora because he was afraid she might disappear. He followed her because he genuinely wanted to be near her. Every morning, he would look for her before breakfast, and every night, he wanted Nora to be the one who told him a story before he went to sleep. For Nora, these small routines were incredibly meaningful. Her previous marriage had taught her that being needed did not always mean being loved. She had spent years cooking, cleaning, and sacrificing herself, only to be told that she was worthless. With Leo, everything felt different. He never expected perfection from her. He simply wanted her presence. Whenever Nora sat down to eat, Leo would sometimes sit beside her and make sure she actually finished her meal. He remembered how she had once told him that she had struggled with food, and in his innocent way, he tried to make sure she would not hurt herself anymore. The little boy who had once been terrified of strangers was now becoming protective of the woman he called his mother. Nora also noticed that Leo was becoming more confident. He was still sensitive, and certain situations could remind him of his kidnapping, but he was no longer completely trapped inside his fear. He could walk through parts of the estate without constantly looking for an escape. He could speak to trusted staff members. Most importantly, he could leave the estate when Nora was beside him. That was a huge change for a child who had once refused to step outside. Nora knew she could not erase his memories, but she could teach him that the world was not always dangerous. Meanwhile, Luca's absence continued. At first, Nora expected him to return after 1 month, but the days continued passing. The staff received occasional information about his business, yet no one gave Nora a clear explanation of when he would be home. She tried not to worry. Luca had warned her that his work could be dangerous, and she understood that the life of a mafia boss was not something she could control. Still, whenever she saw Leo waiting near the entrance, hoping to see his father arrive, Nora felt a quiet sadness. She knew exactly what it felt like to wait for someone who might not care enough to return. She refused to let Leo experience the same pain. Whenever he asked about his father, she reassured him that Luca was coming back. She never made promises she could not keep, but she reminded Leo of the calendar they had created together. Every day, another shield was drawn. For Leo, those little drawings became proof that time was moving forward. For Nora, they became a reminder that Luca's return would eventually change the balance of the household. As Nora continued taking care of Leo, she also started rebuilding her own identity. She no longer looked at herself through Sebastian's eyes. She began eating without guilt, sleeping according to a proper schedule, and accepting that her body did not make her less deserving of respect. The process was not easy. Sometimes she would look in the mirror and remember Sebastian's cruel words. Sometimes she would wonder whether everyone secretly saw her the way he had. But then Leo would appear with his innocent smile and completely destroy those negative thoughts. To him, Nora was simply Nora. She was the person who fed him, listened to him, protected him, and stayed beside him when he was scared. One evening, Leo asked Nora whether she would still be there when his father returned. Nora told him that she had promised to stay as long as he needed her. Leo seemed satisfied, but his next question made Nora pause. He asked whether she would leave if Luca did not want her anymore. Nora had no immediate answer. Their marriage had always been a contract, and she understood that contracts could end. She reminded Leo that whatever happened between adults, she would never stop caring about him. The answer comforted the boy, but it also made Nora realize how deeply attached she had become. She had entered the estate believing that she would eventually leave with enough money to start an independent life. Now, the idea of leaving Leo felt almost impossible. She had become emotionally invested in the child. She wanted him to grow up feeling safe, loved, and confident. She wanted him to know that someone could keep a promise. Yet outside their peaceful little world, Luca's enemies were still active. The reason Leo had been kidnapped in the first place had not disappeared. His father was still a powerful mafia figure, and enemies could use the boy or anyone close to him as leverage. Nora did not fully understand the dangers surrounding her new family, but the security around the estate constantly reminded her that their lives were not normal. Guards watched the property. Staff members followed strict instructions. Every movement outside the estate was carefully considered. Nora sometimes wondered what kind of world she had accidentally entered. Only a few days earlier, she had been a divorced woman carrying $36 in an old bag. Now she was living in a luxurious mansion as the legal wife of one of the most dangerous men in New York. But despite all the money and luxury around her, Nora still felt that her most valuable possession was the relationship she had built with Leo. Then something unexpected happened. Nora needed another medical checkup, and this time Leo insisted on going with her. The staff were nervous because they knew how difficult leaving the estate could be for him. But Nora refused to treat Leo like a prisoner. She asked him whether he was sure. Leo looked at her and said that he was not scared when he was with her. So they left together. For Nora, the journey was emotional because she realized how far Leo had come. The same child who once screamed at women and refused to let anyone touch him was now willingly walking outside because he trusted one person. During the trip, Leo noticed Nora becoming uncomfortable and asked whether she was sick. His concern touched her deeply. Instead of hiding everything, Nora explained that she had experienced depression and had struggled with her relationship with food after years of emotional pain. Leo listened carefully and then offered her his candy, believing that it could make her feel better because his father had once told him that candy helped when something hurt. Nora almost laughed, but she was also deeply moved. The little boy was trying to heal her just as she had been trying to heal him. It was at that moment that Nora understood something important. Their relationship was no longer one-sided. She had entered the Castellino home as Leo's caretaker, but Leo had become part of her healing process too. He gave her a reason to wake up every morning and reminded her that her worth was not determined by her appearance. However, Nora's growing happiness was about to be tested. Just when she believed she had finally found a place where she belonged, the past she had escaped began to reach toward her again. Sebastian had once controlled her life through insults and humiliation, and Nora knew that leaving him physically did not mean the emotional damage would disappear overnight. She had to learn how to stand on her own without waiting for another man's approval. And while she was doing that, Luca was still somewhere outside the estate, surrounded by enemies and dangerous business. Neither Nora nor Leo knew when he would return. But when Luca finally came back, he would not find the same woman he had left behind. He would find a Nora who had become stronger, more confident, and deeply connected to his son. More importantly, he would discover that the contract marriage he created for Leo was beginning to develop feelings and loyalties that could not be written into any legal agreement. The longer Luca remained away, the more Nora began to understand that his absence was not simply a matter of business. There were moments when the atmosphere inside the estate changed without warning. Guards became more alert, phone calls became shorter, and the staff avoided discussing what was happening outside. Nora could sense that something dangerous was taking place, but she had no desire to ask questions that might put her or Leo at greater risk. Her priority remained the little boy who had slowly become the center of her life. Every morning, Leo woke up and searched for Nora before doing anything else. If she was in the kitchen, he wanted to be there. If she was reading, he wanted to sit beside her. If she went upstairs, he waited for her to return. The boy who once pushed every woman away had become deeply attached to her. Nora knew this attachment came from fear as much as love. Leo had already lost his sense of security once, and he was terrified of losing it again. So Nora made sure her actions matched her promise. She never disappeared without telling him where she was going. She never used threats to control him. When he became frightened, she stayed calm and reminded him that he was safe. Slowly, Leo learned that fear did not always have to control him. One afternoon, Nora found Leo sitting quietly near the window, looking at the driveway. He had been waiting for his father again. Nora sat beside him and asked what he was thinking about. Leo admitted that he missed Luca and wondered whether his father would remember to come home. Nora assured him that Luca loved him and that his absence did not mean he had forgotten him. Leo then asked whether Luca would be angry that Nora had become his mother. Nora smiled and explained that his father was the one who had asked her to stay. That answer made Leo feel better. He proudly told Nora that she was the best mother because she had taught him how to eat vegetables and had never been afraid of his angry moments. Nora laughed and told him that even little heroes were allowed to have bad days. Their conversation was interrupted when one of the household staff informed Nora that an important package had arrived for Luca. Nora did not open it because she understood that Luca's business was private, but the arrival reminded her that she was living inside a world she barely understood. Everything about Luca's life was connected to danger. His wealth, his security, his enemies, and even his son's kidnapping were connected to the position he held. Nora began to wonder whether she had underestimated what becoming Mrs. Castellino really meant. She had thought the marriage would be nothing more than a legal arrangement, but now she was emotionally tied to a family surrounded by enemies. If someone wanted to hurt Luca, Leo could become a target. And if someone wanted to hurt Leo, Nora could become a target because of how close they had become. Yet Nora refused to run away. She had promised Leo that she would stay, and for the first time in her life, she wanted to keep a promise not because someone demanded it, but because it mattered to her. Meanwhile, Luca was facing his own problems. Although the transcript does not reveal every detail of his business activities, it makes clear that his work involved violence, danger, and constant threats. His enemies had already used Leo once, and Luca knew they could try again. He was determined to make sure his son remained protected. But while dealing with these threats, Luca began receiving updates about Nora and Leo. The reports surprised him. Leo was sleeping better. He was eating regularly. He was leaving the estate. He was even becoming comfortable around people he previously feared. Luca realized that Nora was accomplishing something that money, security, and professional help had failed to accomplish. His son trusted her completely. Luca also learned that Nora was taking better care of herself. She was no longer punishing her body the way she had during the worst period of her previous marriage. This mattered because Luca had noticed from the beginning that Nora carried emotional wounds that were much deeper than what appeared on the surface. She had entered his house believing she was unattractive and unworthy because Sebastian had spent years convincing her of it. Luca had never cared about those things. He had chosen her because of the way she treated Leo. But now he was beginning to realize that Nora's strength was much greater than he had initially understood. She had survived humiliation, divorce, poverty, and emotional abuse, yet she still had enough compassion to comfort a traumatized child. That quality made her different from everyone else who had entered his life. Back at the estate, Nora's own confidence continued growing. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror and remembered the woman she had been on the night Sebastian threw her out. She remembered the old travel bag, the $36, and the feeling that her entire life had collapsed. But the woman looking back at her now was different. She was no longer waiting for someone to tell her whether she was valuable. She had built a relationship with Leo based on trust, and that relationship had reminded her that kindness could be more powerful than appearance. She touched the ring Luca had given her and thought about how strange her life had become. She had once believed that marriage was over for her. Now she was legally married to a Mafia boss she barely knew, living in his mansion, caring for his son, and wearing his family's ring. Yet she did not regret the decision. The ring had originally been a symbol for Leo, something designed to make the child believe she would stay. But gradually, it had become a symbol of the promise Nora had made to herself as well. She would no longer allow another person to define her worth. She would protect the little family she had unexpectedly found. Then, one evening, Leo came running into her room with excitement. He had heard something from the guards and believed that his father might finally be coming home. Nora tried to remain calm because she had learned not to give Leo false hope, but even she felt a sudden rush of emotion. Luca had been gone far longer than expected. If he returned, everything would change. Nora wondered whether Luca would be surprised by how much Leo had changed. She also wondered whether their marriage would continue exactly as it had been arranged. The original agreement had been simple. Luca would provide money and protection, Nora would care for Leo, and they would remain separate. But life had made the arrangement complicated. Leo genuinely loved Nora. Nora genuinely loved Leo. And Luca, even from a distance, was beginning to realize that the woman he had hired as a caretaker was no longer simply an employee or a contract wife. She had become an essential part of his son's life. The question was whether Luca would allow himself to see Nora as something more than the woman he had chosen for Leo. For now, Nora tried to focus on the present. She tucked Leo into bed, told him another story, and reminded him that little heroes needed rest. Leo smiled and asked whether she would still be there when he woke up. Nora gave him the same answer she had given him from the beginning. She would be there. But neither of them knew that the peaceful life they had created was approaching a dangerous turning point. Luca's return was coming, and with him would come the unresolved dangers of his Mafia world, old enemies, new threats, and questions about the future of a marriage that had started as nothing more than a contract. Luca's absence had now stretched far beyond what anyone had expected, and inside the Castellino estate, Nora had gradually stopped thinking of herself as a temporary guest. She had become part of Leo's daily world, and Leo had become part of hers. Every morning began with the same little routine. Leo would wake up, search for Nora, and then insist that she eat breakfast with him. If Nora tried to skip a meal, Leo would immediately remind her that heroes needed strength and that his mother needed to be strong too. The words were innocent, but they carried a meaning Nora could never ignore. Sebastian had once used food and appearance to make her hate herself, while Leo was now using the same subject to encourage her to care for herself. The difference was enormous. Nora was slowly learning that eating was not something she needed to feel guilty about. She deserved to take care of her body without punishment. She deserved to rest without feeling lazy. She deserved happiness without having to earn it through sacrifice. Leo's affection was helping her understand these things one small moment at a time. At the same time, Leo himself continued changing. The little boy who had once screamed at women and refused to let anyone come close was becoming more confident. He still had moments when memories of his kidnapping returned and caused fear, but now he had someone to hold on to. Whenever he became anxious, he searched for Nora, and her presence helped him calm down. She never told him that he should simply forget what happened. Instead, she listened and reminded him that he was safe. This patience was exactly what Leo had needed. The household staff began noticing the difference too. They had seen 13 nannies fail to connect with him, yet Nora had achieved what seemed impossible. She had never treated Leo as a difficult child. She treated him as a frightened child who needed patience. One afternoon, Leo proudly told one of the staff members that his mother was the bravest woman in the house. Nora overheard him and laughed, but secretly the words touched her deeply. She had never thought of herself as brave. In her previous marriage, she had felt powerless. Sebastian had controlled so much of her life that Nora had forgotten what it meant to make decisions for herself. Now, because of Leo, she was slowly discovering her own strength. Yet the peaceful routine could not last forever. The estate remained connected to Luca's dangerous world, and everyone knew that his enemies had not disappeared. The guards were especially careful whenever Nora and Leo went outside. After Leo had begun leaving the estate with Nora, Luca's security team became even more cautious. They knew that the boy's recovery was a positive development, but they also knew that his attachment to Nora could create a new vulnerability. If someone wanted to hurt Luca, they could target the people he cared about most. Nora was still learning the rules of this world, but she understood enough to know that danger could arrive without warning. She began paying closer attention to the security around the property. She also became more careful about Leo's movements. She did not want fear to control their lives, but she could not pretend that the threats were imaginary. Meanwhile, far away from the estate, Luca continued dealing with problems that kept him from returning home. The transcript makes it clear that his world involved violence, bloodshed, and constant danger, but it does not reveal every detail of the conflict. What is clear is that Luca was fighting to protect his position and his family. He knew that returning home too soon could put Leo and Nora at risk if his enemies were still watching him. So he stayed away longer than he had promised. But every day, he received updates about his son. Those reports increasingly surprised him. Leo was eating better. He was sleeping through the night. He had stopped panicking whenever Nora left the room. He had even begun stepping outside the estate. Luca realized that the woman he had originally chosen as a caretaker was doing more for Leo than anyone had managed before. He also heard that Nora was improving physically and emotionally. She had stopped destroying herself through unhealthy habits and was beginning to accept herself. Luca had no reason to interfere with her recovery, but he found himself thinking about it more than he expected. His original plan had been straightforward. Nora would become Leo's mother figure. The marriage would give the child stability, and the two adults would live separate lives. There was never supposed to be anything complicated between them. But distance had given Luca time to reconsider that arrangement. He began asking himself why Leo trusted Nora so completely. The answer was simple: because Nora had never lied to him, threatened him, or abandoned him. She had given the child exactly what he needed. Luca also knew that Nora had entered his home carrying the wounds of a terrible marriage. She had not come looking for wealth or power. In fact, she had been willing to accept a contract without demanding romance. Her only concern had been that she would be able to keep whatever money she earned and remain independent. That attitude made Luca respect her more than he expected. Back at the estate, Nora was preparing Leo for another night without his father. She could see that he was trying to be brave, but she knew he missed Luca deeply. So she brought out their calendar and helped him draw another shield. Leo counted the remaining days and asked how many shields were left before Daddy came home. Nora told him they could not know exactly, but they could keep waiting. Leo then asked whether his father would like the changes he had made. Nora smiled and told him that Luca would be proud. Leo had become stronger, but he had not become hard. He was still gentle, still affectionate, and still capable of trusting someone. That was the greatest sign of his recovery. Later that night, Nora stood alone near the window and looked at the dark grounds surrounding the estate. She thought about the strange path her life had taken. 3 days after her divorce, she had entered a new household expecting only a job. Instead, she had married a mafia boss, become a mother figure to a traumatized child, and found a reason to believe in herself again. She wondered what would happen when Luca returned. Would he expect the contract to continue exactly as planned? Would he still insist on separate lives? Would he take Leo away from her if he decided the arrangement was no longer necessary? That last thought frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Nora had promised Leo she would stay, but she knew she could not control Luca's decisions. She had no legal claim over Leo beyond the marriage arrangement, and she did not want to assume that Luca would always need her. Yet despite those fears, Nora refused to abandon the child simply because the future was uncertain. She had spent too much of her life allowing other people to decide what she was worth. She would not make that mistake again. She would stay until Leo was safe, and she would continue caring for him as long as he needed her. Then, one evening, the estate received news that made everyone suddenly more alert. Luca's return was becoming possible. The guards began preparing, the staff became unusually quiet, and Leo immediately sensed that something was happening. He ran toward Nora and asked whether Daddy was finally coming home. Nora knelt beside him and told him that they should wait for confirmation, but she could see the excitement in his eyes. For months, Leo had been counting shields on a calendar, waiting for the day his father would walk through the front door. Now that day seemed closer than ever. Nora's heart also began beating faster. She had spent so much time caring for Leo that she had almost forgotten what it would feel like to stand face to face with Luca again. The last time she had seen him, their relationship had been nothing more than a carefully negotiated contract. But now things were different. Leo had changed. Nora had changed. And somewhere along the way, the cold arrangement created for a traumatized little boy had started becoming something that neither adult could easily control. Luca was coming home, and his return would force Nora to face the question she had been avoiding. If the contract was only supposed to be about Leo, why did the thought of Luca returning suddenly make her heart feel so uncertain? The possibility of Luca's return changed the atmosphere inside the Castellino estate almost immediately. For months, Nora had become used to a quiet routine with Leo, but now every movement of the guards and every unexpected phone call made her wonder whether Luca was finally on his way home. Leo was more excited than anyone. He kept asking Nora when his father would arrive and whether they should prepare something special for him. Nora tried to keep his expectations under control because she did not want to disappoint him again, but deep inside, she also wanted Luca to return safely. She had spent so long taking care of Leo that she had begun to feel responsible for the entire little family they had created. When Luca had first left, Nora had thought of him as nothing more than her husband on paper. She respected him, but there had been no emotional connection between them. Now she could no longer look at him so simply. Luca was Leo's father, the man who had trusted her with his most precious responsibility, and the person whose absence had made her realize how important this strange marriage had become. Still, Nora reminded herself that Luca had never promised her love. Their agreement was clear. They had separate rooms, separate finances, and no expectation of intimacy. The marriage existed for Leo. Nora had accepted those conditions because they protected her from another painful relationship. She had already experienced what happened when she gave her heart to a man who did not respect her. She did not want to repeat that mistake. So even though she felt nervous about seeing Luca again, she decided that she would remain calm and treat their relationship exactly as they had originally agreed. Meanwhile, Leo continued preparing for his father's return. He wanted to show Luca everything he had learned while he was gone. He talked about the vegetables he could eat, the stories Nora told him, and the fact that he had managed to leave the estate without panicking. Nora listened and encouraged him, reminding him that his father would be proud. One evening, Leo suddenly asked Nora a question that made her uncomfortable. He wanted to know whether she would still live with them if Luca no longer needed a caretaker. Nora looked at him and realized how deeply the child feared losing her. She gently explained that she had not become part of the family only because she was being paid. She cared about him because he mattered to her. Leo smiled, but he still wanted a promise. Nora repeated the same promise she had given him on their first night together. She would not suddenly disappear. The next morning, the estate became unusually busy. The security team increased their presence, and several members of Luca's organization arrived. Nora immediately understood that something important was happening. She kept Leo close to her and waited. Then, finally, Luca returned. His arrival was nothing like the romantic homecoming that might happen in an ordinary family. There was no celebration, no flowers, and no dramatic welcome. Instead, the house became tense as the powerful Mafia boss stepped through the doors. Luca looked tired from everything he had been dealing with, but the first thing he asked about was Leo. Before Nora could answer, Leo came running toward him. The little boy had waited for months, and now all of his patience disappeared. He threw his arms around his father and held him tightly. Luca immediately hugged him and reassured him that he was home. Nora stood a short distance away and watched them. Seeing Leo happy brought her relief, but she also felt something she could not easily explain. She had missed Luca too. That realization made her uncomfortable because she had spent months telling herself that their marriage was only a contract. When Luca finally looked at her, there was a brief silence between them. He could immediately see that Nora had changed. She seemed more confident than the woman he had left behind. She was no longer constantly apologizing or trying to make herself smaller. She stood beside Leo with quiet confidence, and Luca could see that his son trusted her completely. He thanked Nora for taking care of Leo. Nora simply replied that she had promised to do so. Luca then asked how Leo had been doing, and Nora explained everything that had changed. She told him that Leo was sleeping better, eating regularly, and becoming less afraid of the outside world. Luca was visibly surprised by how much progress his son had made. He knew that Nora had been the reason behind it. Later, when Leo went to bed, Luca and Nora finally had the chance to speak privately. Luca reminded her that the original agreement was still in place. Nora understood and told him that she had no intention of changing the arrangement. She had not stayed because of his money or his status. She had stayed because of Leo. Luca listened carefully. For perhaps the first time, he realized that Nora was not trying to use the Castellino name to improve her own position. She had actually become attached to his son. He also noticed that Nora was no longer the insecure woman described by her past. She had found confidence inside his home, even though she had never expected to. Luca asked her whether she wanted to leave now that he was back. The question caught Nora off guard. She had imagined this moment many times, but she had never prepared an answer. Technically, she could leave. Her financial agreement had protected her, and Luca had never forced her to remain. Yet the thought of walking away from Leo felt painful. She admitted that she did not know what she wanted anymore. Luca did not pressure her. Instead, he told her that she should make the decision for herself. That was important for Nora because Sebastian had always made decisions for her. Luca was different. Even though he was powerful and intimidating, he did not tell her what she had to do. He gave her the freedom to choose. Nora eventually told him that she wanted to stay for Leo. Luca accepted the answer, but something in his expression suggested that he was thinking about more than his son. Over the next few days, Luca began spending more time around the estate. Leo was thrilled to have both of his parents under the same roof. He often pulled them into the same room and insisted that they participate in his games. Nora tried to maintain emotional distance, but Leo made that almost impossible. He would sit between them during meals, ask both of them questions, and and sometimes call them a family without realizing how much the word affected them. Luca noticed that Nora and Leo had developed their own routines. He saw her encouraging Leo to eat, comforting him when he became frightened, and helping him express feelings instead of hiding them. He also noticed something else. Nora still struggled with the emotional scars left by Sebastian. Sometimes she would become quiet after seeing herself in a mirror or hearing a comment about appearance. Luca never mocked her. Instead, he began quietly making sure that no one around him spoke about her disrespectfully. Nora noticed the change, but did not mention it. She was still unsure whether Luca's behavior was simply gratitude or something deeper. She reminded herself that this was not a love story. At least, that was what she believed. But the longer Luca stayed home, the more difficult it became for both of them to maintain the emotional distance they had originally agreed upon. Then Leo unknowingly created another moment that brought Nora and Luca closer together. One night, he asked them both to stay until he fell asleep. Nora sat beside him while Luca stood near the bed. Leo reached out and took one of each of their hands. He looked at them and smiled, completely convinced that the three of them belonged together. For a moment, neither Nora nor Luca said anything. They both understood what Leo was silently asking for. He did not want a contract. He did not care about money, legal documents, or separate bedrooms. He simply wanted his family together. Nora looked at Luca, and Luca looked back at her. Neither of them could predict what would happen next, but both understood that the rules of their arrangement were beginning to change. Their marriage had been created to heal Leo, yet somewhere along the way, the little boy had brought two wounded adults closer than either of them had expected. After Luca returned home, life inside the Castellino estate began to feel completely different. For months, Nora and Leo had created their own peaceful little world, but Luca's presence brought back the reality that they were living inside a powerful mafia family. Guards were everywhere again. Important meetings took place behind closed doors, and Nora could sense that Luca's responsibilities had followed him home. Still, Leo was happier than he had been in a long time. Having both Nora and his father under the same roof made him feel safe, and he began trying to bring them closer together in his innocent way. He would ask Nora to sit beside him while Luca was working, and then he would run to Luca and tell him something funny Nora had done. Sometimes he even insisted that they eat together because, in his mind, a real family should never eat separately. Nora found his behavior adorable, but she also knew that she and Luca had to be careful. Their marriage had been created for Leo, and neither of them had officially changed the rules. Luca still had his private floor, while Nora remained on the second floor. Their finances were separate, and neither had demanded anything from the other. Yet their emotional situation was becoming harder to ignore. Luca had begun paying closer attention to Nora. He noticed how naturally she cared for Leo and how she never used his wealth to control anyone. He also noticed how much she had changed since their first meeting. When Nora had arrived at the estate, she had been carrying an old bag and only $36. She had believed that her appearance made her unworthy because Sebastian had spent years making her feel ashamed. Now, although those wounds had not disappeared completely, she no longer allowed them to control every decision. She spoke more confidently, made her own choices, and stood up for herself. Luca respected that strength. One evening, he found Nora sitting alone after Leo had gone to sleep. He asked whether she was happy with the arrangement. Nora answered honestly that she was not sure. She had entered the marriage believing it would be temporary, but now leaving seemed impossible because of Leo. Luca told her that she did not have to stay because of an obligation. If she wanted to leave, he would not stop her. Nora looked at him and realized that this was exactly what she had needed to hear. In her first marriage, she had never felt free. Sebastian had made her believe that she needed his permission to live her own life. Luca, despite being far more powerful and dangerous, was giving her a choice. Nora admitted that she wanted to stay, but she wanted to stay because she cared about Leo, not because she was being paid. Luca quietly accepted her answer. However, neither of them noticed that Leo had been standing nearby listening to part of the conversation. The boy misunderstood the situation and became frightened that Nora might still leave one day. The next morning, he was unusually quiet. Nora immediately noticed something was wrong and asked him what happened. Leo finally admitted that he had heard them talking about leaving. He was afraid that if Nora left, everything would return to the way it was before. He remembered how frightened and lonely he had felt before she came into his life. Nora hugged him and promised that she was not planning to disappear. She explained that adults sometimes talked about difficult things, but that did not mean they were going to abandon him. Luca also joined them and reassured his son that no one was taking Nora away. Leo relaxed, but the conversation made Luca realize how deeply his son depended on Nora. He could no longer treat her as a temporary solution. She had become part of Leo's emotional foundation. Later that day, Luca asked Nora about her past in more detail. He wanted to understand what had happened during her first marriage and why she had developed such a negative view of herself. Nora hesitated because she hated discussing Sebastian, but eventually she explained that she had spent years serving his family while being constantly criticized. She had been forced to give up her career, cared for his nephew for 2 years, and eventually became responsible for almost everything inside the household. Instead of appreciating her, Sebastian made her feel ashamed of her body and her rural background. He told her that she embarrassed him and that people would laugh at him because of her appearance. Nora admitted that after hearing those words repeatedly, she eventually started believing them herself. She began punishing herself through food and developed unhealthy habits. Luca listened without interrupting. He did not offer empty sympathy or tell her to simply forget the past. Instead, he told her that Sebastian's opinion did not define her value. Nora was surprised by how seriously he spoke. She had expected Luca to see her only as Leo's caretaker, but he was beginning to see the person behind the role. He understood that Nora had survived something difficult and had still chosen to care for a traumatized child. That was not weakness. It was strength. Meanwhile, Leo was becoming increasingly determined to keep his family together. He started drawing pictures of himself, Nora, and Luca standing beside each other. One drawing showed the three of them holding hands in front of the Castellino estate. He proudly gave it to Luca and said that this was their family. Luca looked at the drawing for several seconds before thanking his son. Nora watched quietly from across the room. She could see that the picture affected Luca more than he wanted to show. For a man who had spent most of his life surrounded by danger, trust was difficult. Yet his son had found a way to trust Nora completely. That trust was forcing Luca to reconsider his own emotional distance. At the same time, the dangers surrounding the family had not disappeared. Luca's enemies were still aware of his position, and Leo's previous kidnapping remained a painful reminder of what could happen. Luca increased security around the estate and warned everyone to remain cautious. Nora understood why he was doing it, but she did not want Leo to return to living like a prisoner. She asked Luca whether there was a way to protect Leo without making him afraid of the outside world again. Luca admitted that he had been thinking about the same problem. Nora suggested that they slowly introduce Leo to safe environments rather than keeping him locked inside the estate. Luca initially worried that it was too risky, but he also knew that Nora had already helped Leo make enormous progress. He eventually agreed to allow carefully controlled outings. This decision showed that Luca was beginning to trust Nora's judgment. Their relationship was changing in small ways, even though neither of them was ready to admit it. Nora began noticing that Luca was different around Leo. The feared Mafia boss who could intimidate an entire room became a completely different man when his son reached for him. He listened to Leo's stories, allowed him to sit beside him, and never dismissed his fears. Nora realized that beneath Luca's cold exterior was a father who was terrified of losing his child again. Perhaps that was why he had originally chosen marriage instead of simply hiring another nanny. He wanted Leo to have something permanent. He wanted his son to believe that someone would remain. Nora understood that fear because she had experienced a similar feeling in her own way. She had spent years trying to earn love from someone who constantly made her feel disposable. Leo's trauma was different, but the emotional wound was similar. Both had been made to fear abandonment. Now, together, Nora and Leo were healing each other. And Luca was slowly becoming part of that healing process too. One night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Nora and Luca stood together in the hallway. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Luca told her that he was grateful. Nora replied that she had not done anything extraordinary. She had simply kept a promise to a little boy. Luca disagreed. He told her that keeping a promise when it was difficult was exactly what made it extraordinary. Nora looked at him, and for the first time, she felt that Luca was not speaking to her as a contract wife or as Leo's caretaker. He was speaking to her as a woman he genuinely respected. That moment changed something between them. Nothing dramatic happened, and neither confessed love, but the distance between them became smaller. The contract that had once defined their relationship was slowly becoming less important than the trust they had built. Yet, just as Nora began to feel secure in her new family, the dangerous side of Luca's world was preparing to return. Someone connected to his enemies had started paying attention to the changes inside the Castellino household. They knew Leo had become attached to Nora. They knew Nora had become important to Luca's son. And in the Mafia world, anyone important to the boss could become a target. Nora did not know that danger was approaching. She simply went to Leo's room that night, kissed him goodnight, and promised that she would be there when he woke up. But outside the estate, the shadows were already moving, and the peaceful family they had built was about to face its first serious test. The peaceful life Nora, Leo, and Luca had begun to build was suddenly placed under a shadow of danger. Until now, Nora had understood that Luca's world was dangerous, but she had never truly experienced how close that danger could come to her and Leo. She had always believed that the security around the estate was enough to protect them, but Luca knew better. His enemies were patient, and they understood that attacking him directly was not always the best strategy. If they wanted to hurt the powerful Mafia boss, they could target the people he loved. And by now, everyone who watched the Castellino family knew that Leo was no longer alone. He had Nora, and Nora had become the person he trusted more than anyone. This made her important, whether she wanted that responsibility or not. Luca began increasing security around the estate without explaining every detail to Nora. He wanted to protect her without frightening her, but Nora quickly noticed that something had changed. Guards who had previously stood farther away were now positioned closer to the entrances. Every visitor was checked more carefully, and Luca's private conversations became more frequent. Nora finally asked him whether something had happened. Luca tried to reassure her that everything was under control, but Nora could tell that he was worried. She had learned enough about him to recognize when he was hiding something. Still, she trusted him and decided not to push. Her biggest concern was Leo. She did not want the boy to sense danger and return to the fear he had worked so hard to overcome. So Nora continued acting normally around him. She kept their morning routine, encouraged him to eat, read him stories, and reminded him that he was safe. But one night, something happened that made Nora realize that the danger was no longer far away. Leo woke up frightened from a nightmare and immediately called for her. Nora rushed into his room and found him trembling. She held him close and reminded him that he was in his room and that she was there. Leo eventually calmed down, but he asked whether bad people were coming back for him. Nora did not want to lie, yet she also did not want to make him afraid. She told him that his father had many people protecting him and that no one would allow anyone to hurt him. Luca heard the noise and came into the room. Seeing his son's fear immediately changed his expression. He sat beside Leo and promised that nobody would ever take him away again. For a moment, Nora saw the fear hidden behind Luca's normally cold face. The thought of losing Leo still haunted him. He had already failed to protect his son once, and he refused to allow history to repeat itself. After Leo finally returned to sleep, Luca and Nora spoke privately. Luca admitted that there were people outside who wanted to use his family against him. He did not give her every detail, but he made it clear that the threat was real. Nora listened carefully and asked whether Leo should remain inside the estate. Luca said that for now, yes, they needed to be extremely careful. Nora then asked whether she should leave. Luca immediately rejected the idea. He told her that leaving the estate without protection would be more dangerous, not less. Nora was surprised because she had expected Luca to see her as someone who could simply walk away. Instead, he was telling her that he wanted her to remain close. Nora realized that Luca was not only worried about Leo anymore. He was worried about her too. Their conversation ended quietly, but the emotional distance between them had changed again. Luca returned to his office, while Nora went back to Leo's room. As she watched the sleeping child, she thought about how much had changed. She had originally entered this family because she needed a job. Then she had agreed to a marriage because Leo needed stability. Now she was willing to face danger because she could not imagine abandoning the little boy. Nora knew she had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. The next morning, Leo seemed completely unaware of the danger. He woke up cheerful and asked Nora whether they could have breakfast together. Nora smiled and agreed. She did not want fear to control their lives. She believed Leo deserved a normal childhood, even if their circumstances were anything but normal. During breakfast, Leo proudly told Luca about a picture he had drawn. It showed the three of them standing together, with Leo in the middle holding both of their hands. Luca looked at the drawing for a long moment, and then placed it carefully on the table. He asked Leo why he had drawn them that way. Leo simply said that this was what a family looked like. Nora became quiet. Luca did not answer immediately either. For him, the word family carried enormous weight. His entire life had been shaped by loyalty, blood, power, and responsibility. He had always protected his family through strength. But Leo's drawing represented something different. It represented peace. It represented a home where his son felt safe enough to smile. Luca looked at Nora and realized that she was the reason that peaceful picture existed. Without her, Leo might still be hiding from the world. He might still be unable to sleep, eat, or trust anyone. Nora had brought warmth into a house that had previously been ruled by fear. Luca began to wonder whether the contract marriage had become something much more important than he originally intended. Nora noticed his expression but said nothing. She was still afraid of misunderstanding his feelings. She had already experienced what happened when she believed a man's words and trusted him completely. She would not rush into another relationship simply because Luca was kind to her. She needed time to understand what she truly felt. Later that day, Nora went outside with Leo into the estate garden. Leo was playing with a small toy when he suddenly stopped and looked toward the security gate. Nora asked what was wrong. Leo said he thought he saw someone watching them. Nora looked toward the gate, but could not see anything unusual. She immediately called one of the guards and brought Leo inside. The guard inspected the area and reported that there was nothing obvious, but Luca took the incident seriously. He ordered additional security and told Nora not to take Leo outside without protection. Nora understood. She did not want to challenge Luca when Leo's safety was involved. That evening, Luca told Nora that she needed to be more careful because she was now connected to him publicly through their marriage. Nora answered that she was not afraid. Luca looked at her seriously and said that courage did not mean ignoring danger. It meant understanding the danger and still doing what was necessary. Nora realized that he was not trying to control her. He was trying to protect her. She thanked him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither looked away immediately. There was a quiet understanding between them that had not existed before. They had begun as two strangers who wanted nothing from each other except a practical arrangement. Now they were becoming two people who genuinely cared about each other's safety. That night, Leo once again asked Nora to stay until he fell asleep. Luca happened to be standing near the doorway, and Leo immediately asked his father to stay too. Luca hesitated before sitting beside them. Nora began telling another story about a little hero who was afraid of the dark. In the story, the hero believed he was weak because he was afraid, but eventually learned that being afraid did not make him weak. It simply meant that he had something worth protecting. Leo listened quietly, while Luca looked at Nora. He understood that the story was not only for Leo. It reflected Nora's own journey as well. She had been afraid after her divorce. She had been afraid of starting again. She had been afraid that her appearance made her unworthy of love. Yet she had continued moving forward. She had entered a dangerous household with almost nothing and had somehow become the heart of it. When the story ended, Leo fell asleep holding Nora's hand. Luca remained silent for a moment before thanking her. Nora told him that Leo was the reason she had stayed. Luca replied that he knew, but then added that he was grateful she had chosen to stay. It was a simple statement, but Nora felt its weight. For the first time, she wondered whether Luca's feelings for her were beginning to go beyond gratitude. However, before either of them could say anything more, Luca received a phone call. His expression immediately became serious. He stepped away from the room and listened silently. Nora could not hear the conversation, but she could see that something was wrong. When Luca returned, he told her that there had been movement from one of his enemies. The danger they had been worried about was no longer just a possibility. Someone had started making a move. Luca ordered the security team to prepare for the worst. Nora looked at Leo sleeping peacefully and felt a deep determination rise inside her. She had once been a woman who believed she had nothing left after her divorce. Now she had something worth protecting. She had Leo. She had built a home for him, and she would not allow anyone to destroy it. But Nora still did not know how dangerous the coming days would become, or how far Luca's enemies were willing to go to reach him through the people he loved most. The phone call Luca received that night changed everything. Until that moment, he had been trying to keep the danger away from Nora and Leo, hoping that his security team could handle the situation without frightening them. But now it was clear that his enemies were becoming more aggressive, and Luca could no longer pretend that the threat was distant. He immediately increased security around the estate and instructed his men to monitor every entrance and every person approaching the property. Nora could see the seriousness in his face, but she did not panic. Instead, she stayed close to Leo and continued acting calmly so that the little boy would not sense the fear spreading through the house. Luca explained that they needed to remain inside for the time being, and Nora agreed without argument. She knew that protecting Leo was more important than maintaining their normal routine. Leo, however, quickly noticed that something was different. He saw the guards moving around more often and heard doors opening and closing throughout the night. When he asked Nora whether something bad was happening, she knelt beside him and told him that his father was simply being extra careful because he wanted everyone to remain safe. Leo looked toward Luca and asked whether Daddy was scared. Luca paused before answering. He told his son that being careful did not mean being afraid. It meant knowing how important the people around you were. Leo seemed satisfied with the answer, but Nora understood the deeper meaning behind Luca's words. He was willing to do anything to protect his family. As the night continued, Luca spent hours in his office speaking with his men. Nora remained with Leo until he finally fell asleep. She sat beside his bed and watched his peaceful expression. Only a few months earlier, Leo had been terrified of almost every woman who approached him. He had refused food, suffered nightmares, and avoided the outside world. Now he slept peacefully because he believed Nora would protect him. Nora knew that this trust was precious. She also knew that if something happened to her, Leo could suffer another devastating loss. That thought made her more determined than ever to stay strong. After Leo fell asleep, Nora went downstairs and found Luca still working. She asked him what was happening, and this time he decided to tell her more. He explained that certain people were trying to find a weakness in his organization, and because Leo was his son, the boy had always been one of the most obvious targets. Luca had increased security after the kidnapping, but his enemies were still looking for opportunities. Now Nora had also become connected to the family, making her another person they could potentially use against him. Nora listened quietly. She could have become frightened and demanded to leave, but instead she asked Luca what she could do to help. He looked at her with surprise. He had expected fear, not determination. Nora reminded him that she had already survived a terrible marriage and had rebuilt her life from almost nothing. She was not going to run simply because someone wanted her to be afraid. Luca told her that this was not a normal danger and that courage alone would not protect her. Nora agreed, but she said that she trusted him to keep them safe. That simple statement affected Luca deeply. He was accustomed to people obeying him because they feared him. Nora was different. She trusted him because she had watched his actions. He had never forced her to stay, had never interfered with her finances, and had never demanded intimacy from her. Most importantly, he had allowed her to become the person Leo needed. Their conversation ended without any romantic confession, but there was a new level of understanding between them. Nora went upstairs, while Luca continued working. The next morning, the estate appeared calm again, but everyone was more alert. Leo woke up and immediately asked for Nora. When she entered his room, he smiled and reached for her hand. He asked whether they could have breakfast together. Nora agreed and took him downstairs. Luca was already there. Leo immediately climbed into his father's chair and proudly announced that he wanted a family breakfast. Luca smiled slightly and agreed. Nora sat across from them, and for a few minutes, the three of them looked almost like an ordinary family. Leo talked continuously about his drawings and the things he wanted to do when he was older. He said he wanted to become strong like his father so that he could protect Nora. Nora laughed and told him that he did not need to become a warrior just to protect her. Leo insisted that he would grow very strong anyway. Luca looked at his son and then at Nora, clearly moved by how protective the child had become. He understood that Nora's influence had changed Leo's personality. The boy was no longer defined only by fear. He had begun developing confidence and courage. But that happiness was interrupted when one of Luca's men quietly entered the room and whispered something to him. Luca's expression immediately hardened. He excused himself and left the table. Nora knew something had happened, but she did not want to alarm Leo. She continued talking to him until he finished his breakfast. Later, Luca told Nora that one of his security measures had been tested. Someone had attempted to gather information about the estate. No one had entered, but the attempt confirmed that the family was being watched. Luca wanted Nora and Leo to move to a more secure location temporarily. Nora agreed, but she asked whether Leo would understand. Luca said they would explain it as a short family trip. Nora knew that moving Leo could trigger his old fears, so she carefully prepared him. She told him that they were going somewhere safe and that both she and his father would be with him. Leo asked whether he would have to leave Nora behind. Nora immediately promised that she would stay beside him. That was enough to calm him. The preparations began quickly. Luca's men arranged secure transportation, while Nora packed Leo's belongings. She noticed how much the child had changed. In the past, he would have panicked at the idea of leaving the estate. Now he trusted Nora enough to believe that he could handle it. Before leaving, Leo looked at his room and became quiet. Nora asked whether he was sad. He admitted that he was afraid that someone might take him away again. Nora hugged him and told him that this time he would not face the fear alone. Luca joined them and promised the same thing. For a brief moment, the three of them stood together, and Leo held both of their hands. The little boy had no idea how dangerous their situation really was, but he understood one thing: his parents were together. As they prepared to leave, Luca gave Nora a protective instruction. He told her that if anything happened, she should stay with Leo and follow the security team's directions. Nora nodded. She trusted him, but she also knew that Luca was carrying a tremendous burden. He was trying to protect his son while fighting enemies who were willing to use innocent people as weapons. Nora wondered whether there was anything she could do to reduce that burden. Then she remembered how Luca had once told her that the marriage existed because Leo needed a bond that would not disappear. She realized that perhaps the same principle applied to Luca himself. He had spent years protecting everyone else and rarely allowed himself to depend on anyone. Maybe he needed someone who would stay too. The thought made Nora uncomfortable because it suggested feelings she was not ready to admit. She told herself that she was simply grateful to him. But when Luca walked away to organize the security team, Nora watched him with a concern that went beyond the responsibilities of a contract wife. She was beginning to care about him as a person. Their journey to the secure location began under heavy protection. Leo sat between Nora and Luca, holding Nora's hand while occasionally looking toward his father. He seemed nervous but remained calm. Nora quietly told him that little heroes did not have to be fearless. They simply had to remember that they were not alone. Leo smiled and repeated her words. Luca heard them and looked at Nora with quiet admiration. The woman he had originally hired because she could care for his son had become the strongest emotional support in his life. He had entered the marriage believing that love was unnecessary and that everything could be controlled through contracts and rules. But watching Nora and Leo together was teaching him something he had never allowed himself to believe. Family could not be protected by money alone. Trust could not be purchased, and loyalty could not be written completely into a legal document. As the vehicle moved farther from the estate, Luca received another message that made him realize the situation was even more serious than he had feared. His enemies were not simply watching them. They were preparing something. Luca looked at Nora and Leo and silently promised himself that no matter what happened, he would protect them. Nora, unaware of the full danger ahead, held Leo closer and looked toward Luca. She did not know that the next stage of their journey would test the trust between all three of them and force Nora to confront just how much she had come to care for the Mafia boss who was supposed to be nothing more than her contract husband. The journey to the secure location became the beginning of a new chapter for Nora, Luca, and Leo. The entire trip was surrounded by security, and Luca remained alert to every movement around them. Nora could see that he was carrying a tremendous amount of responsibility, but she also noticed something else. He never stopped watching Leo. Even while speaking to his men, his attention always returned to his son. Leo, meanwhile, remained close to Nora. He held her hand tightly and occasionally looked toward Luca as if checking that his father was still there. For the first time in his life, the little boy seemed to understand that he did not have to choose between the two people he trusted most. Both were beside him. When they finally reached the secure property, the guards immediately inspected the area before allowing them inside. Luca explained that they would stay there until the situation outside became safer. Nora did not complain. She knew that this was necessary, and she was more concerned about Leo's emotional state than her own comfort. The new house was smaller than the Castellino estate, but it was heavily protected. Leo looked around nervously at first, but Nora quickly turned the unfamiliar place into something comfortable. She unpacked his favorite things, arranged his toys, and placed his bedtime storybooks beside the bed. Within a short time, Leo began to relax. He asked whether Nora would sleep nearby, and she promised that she would. Luca watched the interaction from a distance and realized again how much his son depended on her. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Luca and Nora sat together in the quiet living room. For the first time, they had an opportunity to talk without interruptions. Luca thanked Nora for everything she had done for Leo. Nora told him that she did not need thanks because Leo had become like family to her. Luca then asked whether she considered him family too. The question caught Nora completely off guard. She looked at him for several seconds before answering that she did not know what they were anymore. Their marriage had begun as a contract, but the situation had changed. Luca agreed. He admitted that when he first married her, he had only wanted Leo to have a stable mother figure. He had never expected Nora to become so important to his son or to himself. Nora's heart began beating faster, but she reminded herself that Luca was probably speaking about family rather than romance. She did not want to misunderstand him. Luca respected her hesitation and did not push. Instead, he told her that whatever happened, he wanted her to feel safe with him. Nora thanked him. Their conversation remained quiet, but there was an emotional closeness between them that had never existed before. The next morning, Leo woke up unusually cheerful. He ran into the living room and announced that he wanted breakfast with both of his parents. Nora and Luca exchanged a glance before sitting with him. Leo happily talked about becoming stronger and protecting Nora when he grew up. Luca smiled and told him that he still had many years before he needed to worry about protecting anyone. Leo disagreed and proudly flexed his tiny arm. Nora laughed so hard that she almost forgot about the danger surrounding them. For a few minutes, the three of them looked like an ordinary family enjoying a peaceful breakfast. But their temporary happiness was interrupted when Luca received an urgent message. One of his men had discovered new information about the people behind the threat. Luca immediately became serious. Nora recognized the expression and knew that something had gone wrong. She asked whether they were in danger. Luca did not hide the truth this time. He told her that the people watching them had discovered the new location. They would have to move again. Nora immediately thought about Leo. She asked whether there was another safe place. Luca said there was, but he would need to personally lead the transfer. Nora nodded and began preparing Leo. She did not tell him the frightening details. Instead, she explained that they were going on another little trip. Leo trusted her enough not to question it. Before leaving, he asked whether they would eventually return home. Nora told him that they would return when it was safe. Luca watched her carefully and realized how naturally she had learned to protect Leo emotionally. She never lied to him, but she also never gave him more fear than he could handle. That was one of the qualities Luca admired most about her. As the security team prepared the vehicles, Luca pulled Nora aside. He told her that if anything went wrong, she should take Leo and follow the guards. Nora refused to separate from him. She told Luca that she would not leave him behind either. Luca stared at her, surprised by the determination in her voice. Nora then reminded him that he had once asked her to become part of the family, so Leo would never have to fear being abandoned. She told him that the same promise applied to all of them now. Luca did not answer immediately. Instead, he gently told her to stay close. The convoy moved out under heavy protection. This time, however, the journey did not remain peaceful. The security team suddenly became tense, and Luca received information that another vehicle had been spotted nearby. He immediately ordered everyone to remain alert. Nora held Leo tightly and told him to stay calm. Leo was frightened, but instead of panicking, he remembered Nora's lessons. He took a deep breath and held her hand. He was still afraid, but he was no longer helpless. Luca noticed this and felt proud of his son. Suddenly, the convoy had to change direction. Luca's men believed that someone was trying to follow them. The situation became chaotic, but the security team managed to create distance. Nora kept her attention on Leo the entire time. She did not allow her own fear to show because she knew that Leo would become frightened if he saw her panic. Eventually, They reached another protected location. Once inside, Luca immediately checked Leo and then Nora. Both were safe. Luca's relief was obvious. He had been prepared for the worst, and the thought of losing either of them had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Nora noticed his hands were trembling slightly. She reached out and quietly touched his arm. Luca looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke. Nora told him that they were safe. Luca answered that he knew, but he had been afraid that he might lose them. Those words affected Nora deeply. He had never spoken so openly about his emotions before. She realized that beneath his reputation as a ruthless mafia boss was a man who was terrified of losing the people he loved. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Nora stayed with Luca in the living room. She told him that he did not always have to carry everything alone. Luca asked what she meant. Nora explained that he had spent his entire life protecting everyone else, but sometimes even the strongest person needed someone beside him. Luca looked at her and quietly asked whether she was offering to be that person. Nora hesitated. She knew that answering honestly could change everything. Finally, she said that she did not know what the future held, but she knew that she no longer saw their marriage as just a contract. Luca remained silent for several seconds. Then he admitted that he felt the same way. Neither of them said the word love, but the meaning was clear. Their relationship had changed. What had started as an arrangement for Leo was becoming a genuine emotional bond between two adults who had both been hurt by their pasts. Nora was still afraid of trusting another man, and Luca was still learning how to let someone close, but they were beginning to understand each other. Their connection was no longer based on money, legal documents, or responsibility. It was based on respect, trust, and the family they had created together. Meanwhile, Leo slept peacefully in the next room, unaware that his simple wish for a mother had changed the lives of both adults around him. The next morning, Luca promised Nora that he would end the threat surrounding them so that they could finally return home. Nora believed him. She had learned that Luca kept his promises when the people he loved were involved. But before they could return to normal life, Luca still had to confront the enemies who had threatened his family. He knew that the danger would not disappear until he dealt with it directly. And this time, he was not fighting only for his position or his organization. He was fighting for Nora and Leo. For the first time, the mafia boss who had once believed that emotions were weaknesses had something much more powerful motivating him. A family he could not bear to lose. The danger that had followed Luca, Nora, and Leo finally reached its final stage. But this time Luca was no longer fighting only for his business empire. He was fighting for the family he had unexpectedly found. After moving Nora and Leo to the secure location, Luca gathered his most trusted men and prepared to deal with the people who had been threatening them. Nora could see the determination in his eyes, but she could also see the fear hidden beneath it. Luca had always believed that he could control every situation through power, money, and careful planning. But now he had two people in his life whose safety mattered more to him than anything else. Before leaving, he went to Leo's room. The little boy was already awake and immediately asked whether his father was going somewhere. Luca knelt beside him and promised that he would return. Leo looked at him seriously and asked whether Nora would stay with him until then. Luca looked toward Nora and said that she would. Leo smiled and hugged his father tightly. Luca then stood up and looked at Nora. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nora understood that Luca was preparing to face something dangerous, and she knew there was a possibility that he might not return quickly. Instead of asking him to stay, she simply told him to come back safely. Luca quietly promised that he would. Then he left. While Luca dealt with the threat outside, Nora remained with Leo. She tried to keep the boy calm and continued their normal routine. They ate breakfast together, played games, and read stories. But Nora could not completely hide her worry. Every time she heard a vehicle outside, she wondered whether Luca had returned. Leo noticed her nervousness and tried to comfort her just as she had comforted him countless times before. He told her that his father was strong and would come back. Nora smiled and told him that he was right. She was proud of how much Leo had changed. The frightened child who once believed everyone would abandon him was now able to trust, hope, and even comfort someone else. Nora realized that healing had never been about forgetting the past. It was about learning that the past did not have to control the future. Hours later, Luca finally returned. He was exhausted, but he was alive and safe. Nora immediately knew from his expression that the danger had been dealt with. Luca told her that the people who had threatened his family would no longer be able to reach them. He did not give her unnecessary details, but Nora understood that he had finally protected the family from the immediate danger. Leo ran toward him and hugged him tightly. Luca lifted his son into his arms and promised him that everything would be okay. For the first time in a long time, the three of them could breathe without constantly looking over their shoulders. When they eventually returned to the Castellino estate, something felt different. It was still the same huge mansion surrounded by security, but it no longer felt cold or empty. Leo ran through the house happily, showing Luca all the places where he and Nora had spent their days. He proudly showed his father the calendar covered with little shields and the drawings he had made while waiting for him. Luca kept every drawing instead of throwing them away. Nora watched from a distance and realized how much their family had changed. The mansion was no longer simply Luca's territory. It had become their home. Later, Luca and Nora finally discussed their marriage. The original contract had been created for one purpose: to give Leo the stability of a mother figure. But that purpose had already been fulfilled in a way neither of them could have predicted. Leo no longer saw Nora as a caretaker. He saw her as his mother. Nora no longer saw Luca as a distant mafia boss. She saw him as the father of the child she loved and as a man who had slowly earned her trust. Luca told Nora that if she wanted to leave, he would never stop her. He wanted her to choose freely because he knew what it felt like to live without freedom. Nora looked at him and finally admitted that she did not want to leave. She did not want another contract. She wanted a real marriage, but only if Luca wanted the same thing. Luca's answer was simple. He told her that somewhere along the way, the contract had stopped mattering to him. He had begun caring about her long before he was willing to admit it. He admired her strength, her kindness, and the way she had brought Leo back to life emotionally. More importantly, he loved the way she had learned to value herself again. Nora became emotional because for years she had believed that she was not worthy of love. Sebastian had convinced her that her appearance made her undesirable and that she should feel ashamed of herself. But Luca never measured her value by her body. He valued her character, her courage, and her heart. Nora finally understood that she did not need another person to prove that she was beautiful or worthy. She already was. Love was supposed to add happiness to her life, not determine whether she deserved one. Then Leo entered the room and immediately asked whether they were fighting. Nora laughed through her tears and told him that they were not fighting. Leo looked between them and asked whether they were still going to be a family. Luca smiled and told him that they were. Leo immediately became excited and hugged both of them. In that simple moment, the contract that had once brought them together became meaningless. They no longer needed a piece of paper to explain why they belonged together. They had already built something stronger through trust, patience, and love. Nora's life had changed completely. She had entered the Castellino household with an old bag, almost no money, and a broken heart. She had believed that her previous marriage had destroyed her future. Instead, the end of that marriage had become the beginning of a new life. She discovered that being rejected by one person did not mean she was unworthy. She learned that her body did not determine her value. She learned that kindness was not weakness. Most importantly, she learned that she could love again without losing herself. Leo's journey was equally important. He had started as a traumatized child who could not trust women, could not sleep peacefully, and was terrified of being abandoned. Nora never tried to force him to change overnight. She gave him patience and a safe place to heal. Slowly, he learned to trust again. He learned that people could keep their promises. He learned that family was not simply about blood. Family was about the people who stayed when things became difficult. And Luca changed too. He had spent years believing that strength meant controlling everything around him. As a mafia boss, he had survived by trusting very few people and keeping his emotions hidden. But Nora and Leo taught him that true strength could also mean allowing someone else into his life. He learned that protecting a family was not only about eliminating threats. It was also about listening, understanding, and being present. Nora gave him something his money and power could never buy: a home filled with genuine love. Eventually, their life became peaceful again. Leo continued growing into a confident and kind young boy. Nora continued taking care of herself and never returned to the destructive habits that had once controlled her life. Luca remained powerful and dangerous to his enemies, but inside his home, he became a loving husband and devoted father. The three of them created ordinary memories that meant more than any amount of wealth. They had family breakfasts, celebrated birthdays, traveled together, and filled the mansion with laughter. The huge house that had once felt cold became a place where Leo could finally feel safe. Years earlier, Nora had believed that her life had ended when Sebastian rejected her. She had walked away carrying only $36, convinced that she had lost everything. But sometimes losing the wrong person is what creates space for the right people to enter your life. Nora did not find her happiness because she became thinner, richer, or more beautiful according to someone else's standards. She found happiness when she finally understood her own worth. The contract marriage had started as an arrangement between two strangers. Luca needed a mother for his traumatized son, and Nora needed a fresh beginning after a painful divorce. Neither expected love. Neither expected to become a real family. But Leo changed everything. His need for a mother brought Nora and Luca together, and their journey taught all three of them that family is built through choices, not simply circumstances. In the end, Nora did not become Mrs. Castellino because she needed Luca's money or protection. She became his true wife because they chose each other. Luca did not keep Nora because she was useful to Leo. He kept her because she had become the woman he loved. And Leo did not simply gain a caretaker. He gained the mother he had been waiting for. What began as a contract became a promise. What began as a broken woman searching for a new life became the story of a woman discovering her strength. What began as a frightened child searching for safety became a family learning how to love one another. And what began as a cold mafia boss protecting his empire ended with a man finally realizing that the greatest thing he could protect was not his power, but the people who had become his entire world.